Perfect. Thank you all for coming. I'm Rachel Silva, and I work for the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program. Welcome to the Sandwiching and History Tour of First Presbyterian Church. Before we get started, I want to thank Scott Seidenschwartz. I don't know if Scott made it up here yet. He's going to play the organ for us at the end. So yes, just to answer that question ahead of time, you will get to hear the beautiful organ at the end of my spiel. And also want to thank Rosalie Cheatham. Is Rosalie in here? There she is. Rosalie Cheatham for her help with the tour as well. This tour is worth 1 hour of HSW continuing education credit through the American Institute of Architects. If anyone is interested, you may see me after the tour. Organized on July 27th, 1828, Little Rock's First Presbyterian Church is the oldest church in continuing service of any major denomination in Arkansas. The congregation met at several downtown locations before 1914, when it moved into a new 3-story education building and temporary sanctuary at the southwest corner of 8th and Scott, in the building that's behind me in front of you. The present sanctuary was completed in 1921, and a second education building over here to the west was finished in 1957. All 3 sections of the church were designed by Little Rock architect John Parks Almond. First Presbyterian Church was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1986. Arkansas's First Presbyterian congregation was organized at Little Rock by Reverend James Wilson Moore. Moore studied at Princeton Theological Seminary and was licensed in October 1827 by the Northumberland Presbytery in Pennsylvania. The following month, he was ordained to serve as a missionary in the Arkansas Territory. Moore arrived at Little Rock in January 1828 and encountered a settlement of about 150 people, only 6 of whom were professing Christians. Despite this low number, he immediately got to work and preached the first Presbyterian sermon in Arkansas on January 28, 1828, at Jesse Brown's schoolhouse, which was located near the foot of Rock Street. Moore later recorded in his diary, quote, "The first Sabbath I preached, I was told afterwards there were at least 40 or 50 pistols and as many bowie knives in the congregation. I was not afraid of them, but told them of heaven and hell and of Calvary." Reverend Moore formally organized the First Presbyterian Church on July 27, 1828, and had 7 charter members, 5 women and 2 men. The church grew slowly during its first few years and held services in temporary locations until 1833, when a lot near the southeast corner of 2nd and Main Streets was purchased from William Woodruff. The church constructed its first building on this site with the help of a donation from Reverend Ezra Stiles Eli of Philadelphia. Reverend Moore pastored the church until 1840, when he moved to Sylvania, Arkansas, near present-day Cabot, where he opened the Sylvania Academy for Boys and the Sylvania Presbyterian Church. Sylvania like the end of Pennsylvania, where he was from. First Presbyterian struggled for a few years after the departure of Reverend Moore, but was re-energized during the pastorate of Reverend Joshua Green, who served from 1847 to 1854. In 1853, Mary Ashley, the widow of Chester Ashley, gave the church land on East Markham between Cumberland and Rock Streets. A new church with a wooden steeple was completed on the site. The church's second building burned in February 1866 when a fire started in the store of F. Sweeney and spread to nearby commercial buildings in the church. The congregation sold the lot on East Markham for $6,250, and that was put toward the purchase of property at the northwest corner of East 5th and Scott, or now Capitol and Scott. In 1867, construction on the church's third building began at 5th and Scott. Completed in 1869, it was the first church built at Little Rock after the Civil War. The brick Gothic Revival-style church with the tall corner spire set the standard for church design in Little Rock in the late 19th century. The size of the congregation grew considerably under the guidance of Reverend Thomas Rice Welch, who pastored the church from 1860 to 1885. In 1878, Reverend Welch reported an average attendance of 400 to 450 during Sunday morning worship and about 200 for Sunday school. In 1882, some members withdrew from the congregation at First Presbyterian to start Second Presbyterian Church. Reverend John Van Leer, who came to First Pres in 1909, ushered in another important era of growth. Under his leadership, the congregation grew and soon needed additional rooms for Sunday school whenever they were in their building at Capitol and Scott. Several church members favored the expansion of the existing church, but the increasing value of the property at 5th and Scott turned some people away from that decision, so they changed their mind, and it was a little bit bittersweet, I think. They changed their mind, and they sold the property at 5th and Scott and bought property 3 blocks to the south at the corner of 8th and Scott. In 1913, the church purchased these lots at the southwest corner of 8th and Scott. Before the property was purchased by the church, the southwest corner of 8th and Scott, where we are today, was occupied by the 1875 home of U.S. District Judge Henry C. Caldwell. The Caldwell house originally faced east toward Scott Street with an address of 802 Scott. The home was later purchased by F.B.T. Hollenberg, the president of the Hollenberg Music Company, who in 1913 moved the house slightly to the west and turned it sat right over here, and turned it to face north on 8th Street. So it then had an address of 115 East 8th. In 1914, First Presbyterian Church completed the 3-story education building on the south end of the former Caldwell-Hollenberg property, and that's the building behind me in front of you. The 1914 education building was designed by Little Rock architect John Parks Almond, who was working at the Charles Thompson firm at the time. Worship services were held on the second floor of the education building for 7 years. And this is, you may not all be able to see this, but this is a picture taken of the back of the 3-story education building. So if you came in from the parking lot behind the church, that's what you were looking at. That's the oldest part. Okay. It's interesting to note that the 1869 church building that was at the corner of Capitol and Scott was demolished in fall 1916 to make way for the 1917 Theo Sanders designed Hollenberg building at 112 to 114 East Capitol, as well as auto parking. There was never anything else built in that parking lot that still is there at the northwest corner of Capitol and Scott. And most people know the Hollenberg building is the old Stevens building. The present Gothic Revival-style sanctuary was designed by John Parks Almond, who was then working on his own. Almond's design for the sanctuary blended with the earlier education building, as the 2 structures would be attached. Ground was broken for the sanctuary in May 1920, and the cornerstone was laid on Sunday, November 7th, 1920, in front of many church members and friends. Items placed in the cornerstone included the roll of the bench of elders, roll of the board of deacons, roster of the ladies' auxiliary, a roll of the Sunday school, a roll of the church membership, a history of the church, the original prayer book used by William Woodruff, founder of the Arkansas Gazette, a copy of the Gazette's Centennial Edition, and a list of church members who fought in the Great War, or World War I. The sanctuary was erected at a cost of about $300,000, including the furnishings, and that's equal to about $4 million today. The first service was held here in the new sanctuary on October 2nd, 1921. When the sanctuary was first completed, the windows contained a type of clear glass. So you can look up and see, try to imagine that with just clear glass. It's kind of hard. All but 2 of the stained glass windows in the church were paid for by the generous bequest of church member Frances Ann Fanny Ashley Johnson, who died in 1926. She was the granddaughter of Chester and Mary Ashley. The other 2 windows were given by T.H. Humphreys. It's this one right here is the Humphreys Memorial window. You can see a little plaque below it. It's kind of difficult to read. That one was given by T.H. Humphreys in memory of his wife, Beulah, and the other one is right across from it. And that one was given by George B. and Marion Rose in memory of their daughter, Miriam. The stained glass windows were all handmade by Payne Studios in Patterson, New Jersey, and they were dedicated in 1928. I mentioned the old Caldwell Hollenberg house earlier and told you it was moved to face north on 8th Street and sat right over here. Church sanctuary was built right next door to that house. First Presbyterian acquired that house in 1937, and they rented it out for apartments until 1951. The church demolished the house in March 1952 to make room for parking. On August 12, 1956, ground was broken for a new education building over here to the west of the sanctuary. The new education building was also designed by John Parks Almond and featured a square tower at the entrance and one of his trademark design elements. Let's see. I'll hold this up too while I'm saying this. One of his trademark design elements, this picture shows you the square tower, and then the trademark design element of John Parks Almond, it's this loggia area right here that connects the two and creates a little courtyard in between the sanctuary and the rest of the education building. A loggia with pointed arch openings and the little things that he called lookouts. They're little faux exposed rafter tails right here along the top of the loggia. They're not really exposed rafter tails, they're just decorative detail, and they hold up the guttering. That was the purpose of those. So that was started in 1956, and it was formally opened November 3rd, 1957. And during the construction of that new education building, the 1914 education building was also remodeled, and a chapel was added on the first floor. On the morning of May 29, 1958, the sanctuary was significantly damaged by a fire. At the time, the sanctuary was actually getting a new roof, and there were roofers on the roof whenever the fire was discovered. But it's a miracle that they were here and it happened in the morning and people were around. But the roofers were on the west side of the roof and the fire started over here on the east side. It was likely caused by the exposure of electrical wiring in the ceiling. But luckily, the fire department had the blaze under control within about 45 minutes and no one was injured. The new $225,000 education building, which had just been completed over here to the west of the sanctuary less than a year before that, was not harmed at all. Only a few of the lower stained glass panels were shattered during the blaze, and the main chandelier above me remained intact because it was anchored to a steel beam in the church roof. However, the sanctuary in the basement below us sustained smoke and water damage valued at $160,000, or about $1.3 million today. After the fire, the roof structure was completely rebuilt, and the stained glass windows, organ, and light fixtures were repaired. The original cork floor was replaced with hardwood, and the pews all had to be replaced. And church services were temporarily held in the auditorium of the Albert Pike Memorial Temple, just to the north of us, while the sanctuary was being repaired. A couple interesting things I thought about the residential lots just to the south of the church in the parking lot area today. Many of you probably remember this house being moved that I'm about to mention. The Dudley E. Jones / Arthur Jones house, built in the mid-1860s, used to sit right behind the education building. Some of you are nodding your head. Used to sit right behind the back of the church, like almost up against the wall, it seemed like, and faced Scott Street. About 2005, that house was moved to the 1300 block of Broadway, just south of Mount Holly Cemetery, and it's still there. It's got all the lattice on the porch. And then the Gus Blass house, built in 1879, big two-story Queen Anne style house, sat at the far corner of the property, the northwest corner of 9th and Scott, where you pull into the parking lot back there, and it unfortunately did not make it. It was not moved. It was acquired by the church in 1965 and demolished in 1966 to make way for the parking lot. So I've told you several times, the three buildings that now compose First Pres were all designed by John Parks Almond, but the one that's the most notable is the sanctuary, the 1921 sanctuary. And in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, of course, Gothic Revival style design was very popular, especially for churches, because it used medieval forms and it drew the line of sight upward toward God and heaven. Characteristics of the style at First Pres included use of the pointed arch, beautiful stained glass windows with elaborate tracery, a parapet at the front entrance, which you may or may not have seen if you didn't come in that way. The parapet at the front entrance, which features twin octagonal towers with battlements and a deeply recessed pointed arch above the front entrance. It has buttresses on the side and a steeply pitched roof. And John Parks Almond was from Georgia. He attended Emory College and later continued his education at Columbia University in New York. His first job after graduation was in Havana, Cuba. He stayed there for only a year before he learned that Charles Thompson was looking to hire an architect in Little Rock, and he got the job. He arrived here on July 13th, 1912, and he soon met Frances Reeve Edmondson, whom he married on November 4th, 1914. The couple had two sons, Alexander James, or A.J. Almond, and John Parks Almond, Jr., who died as an infant during the influenza epidemic of 1918. Almond worked for Charles Thompson from July 1912 to December 1915. His first solo commission was the U.M. Rose School, which is now the administration building at Philander Smith College. He opened his own office in January 1916, and his practice grew tremendously throughout the 1920s. Some of his most notable designs included Little Rock High School, later Little Rock Central High School, which he designed with the firms of Mann and Stern and Wittenberg and Deloney, First Presbyterian Church, where we are, the Big House at Couchwood near Hot Springs, and the Medical Arts Building in Hot Springs. And he went on to design sanctuaries, chapels, education buildings, and parsonages at more than 50 churches throughout the state of Arkansas. He died on March 24th, 1969. Okay, now some details about the interior of the sanctuary. The organ, I know you all want to know about the organ. The original organ, this is not it. The original organ was made by the E.M. Skinner Company of Boston, but it wasn't installed until spring 1922. The sanctuary was completed in 1921. So there was a slight problem because then they had to install the organ in an opening behind me that was already finished. So it didn't fit how it was supposed to. So you can see the arch, the pointed arch behind the top pipes. It was all in there, and there was an organ screen over that opening. It was all hidden back there. But it necessitated them putting the swell part of the organ way up in the tall pitch of the roof, and things were turned sideways. It wasn't how it was supposed to be, in other words. And it was reworked and repaired over the years several times. And then in 2003 and 2004, they did a major renovation and remodel of the entire sanctuary. And at that time, they got the new organ, the 2004 Nichols-Simpson concert organ built here in Little Rock. And the Arkansas Guild of Organists holds at least one concert here every year. And I told you we're going to get to hear it played in just a few minutes. Also, during that remodel, they reworked the chancel area behind me, and they installed this new floor in that remodel. The bell in the east tower on this side is the bronze bell from the church at 5th and Scott. It was cast in West Troy, New York in 1869. The light fixtures, which I think are extremely beautiful, they're original. They were made by the Arkansas Electric Company out of solid amber glass for $6,143, equal to about $81,000 today. The main chandelier, I told you, did not fall during the 58 fire, but the other ones did. All these smaller ones did fall during the fire, and they broke the pews below. But they were all repaired. And then many of you know about Stew Pot, but I wanted to mention that. 70s, and provides hot meals to about 150 people in need every weekday from noon to 1. And the program also offers free clothing and medical services. And the church is currently looking for a pastor. Stephen Moody is the pulpit supply right now, but he's not officially the interim pastor. And the last thing I have to tell you is a quick story if you want to hear it. Yeah, we've got time. I knew somebody was going to ask me about this, so I just went ahead and did the research, and I've got it. And somebody's already asked me about it, so I'm glad I did. The connection that this building has to the last lynching in Little Rock, which happened in May 1927. On April 30th, 1927, the body of 12-year-old Floella McDonald was discovered in the belfry at First Presbyterian Church. The Little Rock police found her body after the church's black janitor, Frank Dixon, reported a persistent stench coming from that area. And I've totally made this more PC than it is. Dixon immediately became the prime suspect, and his son, Lonnie, was also arrested because an 8-year-old white girl reported that he had accosted her somewhere near the church a few weeks before. So the next day, Lonnie Dixon confessed to murdering Floella McDonald after being interrogated for 24 hours straight. In order to protect Lonnie Dixon and his father from mob violence, the police secretly moved them to the Texarkana City Jail. They drove him to Malvern and put him on the train to Texarkana. And that was prudent because a mob of a few thousand people did show up at Little Rock City Hall and went down to the state penitentiary, which was then on Roosevelt, and demanded to know the whereabouts of the Dixons. On the morning of May 4th, nothing happened. Nobody was harmed during that. But a couple days later, on the morning of May 4th, a black man named John Carter allegedly assaulted a white woman and her daughter while they were traveling in a wagon a few miles west of Little Rock. And of course, news of this attack spread quickly, and racial tension was already high on the heels of the murder of Floella McDonald. So posses of white men volunteered to help the sheriff track down Carter. About 5 o'clock that afternoon, the group found Carter hiding in a tree, and before any of the law enforcement could get there, they lynched him. They shot him, shot the body about 200 times, and then they tied him to a car and drug him all around downtown Little Rock. They stopped at the intersection of 9th and Broadway, right in the heart of the Black Business District, where they set his body on fire. And a mob of about 5,000 people rioted throughout that neighborhood for the next 3 hours until 10 o'clock that evening, when Governor John Martineau finally called out the National Guard to disperse them. So the lynching of John Carter made national headlines because the national news media were focusing on Arkansas and the entire Mississippi River Valley at that time anyway, because what else is going on? It was the spring of 1927. It's flooding. They were all paying attention to Arkansas anyway, and then this happened, so it got a whole lot more attention. And left, of course, deep scars among Little Rock residents that wouldn't heal for decades. And meanwhile, Lonnie Dixon, the boy accused of killing Llewellyn McDonald, was tried and convicted for her murder. He was sentenced to death in the electric chair and was executed on June 24, 1927, just a month after his trial, on his 18th birthday. Okay, so that being said, that was the story that people wanted to know about. And not to say this church had anything to do with that, but just that the event happened here and that her murder was kind of the catalyst for John Carter's life. Does anybody have any questions? Brian? No, do you know capacity? 350 to 400. There was, and there still is, but they've rearranged it. She asked about the choir section. Okay, there's pictures downstairs that we'll look at. Yes, both of these and this were designed to be balcony seating. Did you hear that, Rosalie? What's the attendance here now? Small.
Not full.
I think so, because they were made by the Arkansas Electric Company. I think so. She says every Sunday. Anybody else? Okay. Well, we're going to have the next tour Friday, March 4th at the Waldo Tiller House over in Sherrill Heights off Repsamen Park Road in that direction. I can give you directions if you don't know where that is. March 4th, Waldo Tiller House. And Scott is going to play the organ for us, and then after he's finished, then we're all going to, if you want to, we're all going to go down these stairs and down another set of stairs to the fellowship hall. And Rosalie has many historical photographs laid out for you to look through and some scrapbook pages, and they have really nice refreshments. So you don't want to miss that. Okay. Is Scott behind me? Yeah. Okay.